Hello, everyone. I'm Maria Shemkalian, the Vice Chair of Pennsylvania Film Industry Association, and I'm very excited about our guest today, DJ Dodd, who has experience working on so many fantastic films, and he has worked with so many stars. It's been Daniel Radcliffe and Michael Caine and Courteney Cox, and just to name a few, there's so many amazing people. Uh, I can sit here all day and list them. So I think instead of that, we will just jump straight to the questions. And the first one, as always, is how did you get started in this competitive and difficult industry?
So I guess I started out, I went to Drexel for business. And I've always been interested in the entertainment industry. I always wanted to get into film and television. And I tried to figure out the best way to go about it. And I talked to some different people. And a lot of people told me, if you want to be a producer, a good way to sort of figure out what facet you're the best at, or what makes sense for you is to study business, because there's a lot of different elements of business when you're producing a film or producing a TV show or whatever it is, from finance to marketing, just the general organization of things and all of that. So I got a degree, in business administration, but I minored in film, and I worked on a lot of different productions at Drexel. And then I went to film school. I moved out to LA, and I went to Chapman University to get my MFA in film and television producing. And that, was more of a conservatory, and, I was producing films right away, short films, and being taught, the difference between independent projects and studio projects, working with writers and developing, different types of television and film projects as well. And I got an internship with a producer named David Foster. He actually passed away about 6 months ago. But he was a huge producer in the 80s and 90s, produced John Carpenter's The Thing, Short Circuit, A River Wild, The Mask of Zorro, a ton of huge, iconic films. And I sort of learned, a lot of the basics from him. You can study in school, you can study producing, you can study business, but until you actually get your feet wet and you're thrown into the trenches, you don't really, know what it's like. But, working with him, he was sort of at the end of his career. So, I got to kind of, I had a lot of responsibility, and that was great in sort of learning the ropes, so to speak. So I worked with him for a couple of years, and we developed some projects with Universal and some other projects, some remakes that he had the rights to, like The Thing and Short Circuit. There was a project in development that we worked on. And then I sort of, shifted gears. He was sort of getting ready to retire and whatnot. So I shifted gears to television, and I ended up getting a job producing some unscripted television back, where I grew up in the Philly area. So I moved back to start on that. And that was sort of my first, foray into the television side of things. And I did that for a few years, and I've worked in development in television. I've sold projects to, a number of different cable networks. And I, on the side, I was also still working on my film projects, and, slowly but surely getting different projects off the ground, and have built up, a little bit of a slate there of projects that I've produced over the last, 6 or 8 years. As you mentioned, some of the stars, varying in budgets from a few $100,000 to a few million, with, many different distributors, and across different genres.
And you've mentioned that you've learned the difference between independent films and studio films. So what is the difference on your end in terms of producing?
So, for starters, studio films, there's a lot of sort of red tape that you have to get through. There's a lot of people that have to sign off on different things. And if one person doesn't like the script, then, there's sort of an unlimited amount of resources, an unlimited amount of money. If they want to make this movie, but they don't like this script, or they don't like this director, they'll just find another writer. They'll go pay somebody else to do another draft, and you just keep going and going and going, and sort of what they call, development hell, where you just kind of don't ever get out of it. And, a lot of writers make their living doing that. They do rewrites and they don't ever get a project made. They don't ever get credits, but they're constantly paid by the studios because they're polished writers, or they come in and write a second or third draft or something like that. So, the studio process can be long, but it can also be really quick. If the studio buys a script or they buy a book and they want the rights to a book and they want to get it made really quickly because there's a market for it right now. This book was a New York Times bestseller and they want the movie to come out next summer, then they'll fast track it. And again, with the unlimited resources, they can move as quickly or as slowly as they want. It doesn't matter. And it's all about, for the studios, it's all about, for the most part, the packaging. There has to be a director and stars big enough to warrant a wide theatrical release, but what they call, bankability. There are stars that you can still get movies made, at a few $1 million, and they may go straight to VOD or DVD and that sort of thing. But the projects that, get a wide theatrical have to have your, Chris Hemsworth, big names. So, and a director that's also had, has a track record of releasing successful theatrical box office films. In the independent world, we deal in the same type of thing. There's packaging involved with every project. You have to go out and find, firstly, a good script. It's very difficult with a first-time director right now. They usually at least want to see that they've done something, or they have a short that maybe went to Sundance and did really well, and maybe you're adapting that short into this feature. Maybe there's something else that they've done. They've directed music videos for some high-profile artists, and that can be, enough. But there usually needs to be, if they've done one or two films, that usually works. And then the cast has to be, they have to be bankable, not in the sense of the studios, but in the sense of, there's some international value there where they can take the film and sell it overseas to, the different territories and make money that way. And there has to be a draw, for the video on demand market. And that's really the biggest thing, when a distributor is sort of evaluating a project, whether they're going to give you financing up front in the form of an MG, or you've made the film and they're going to buy it. They run all their analytics on, what are the numbers on what we think we can make on video on demand, on DVD, in ancillary platforms, like if they sell it to Showtime or Cinemax or HBO for an exclusive window and things like that. So, those are the big differences. It's really, the budget level is the biggest difference, but the way that I kind of look at it is, you have a script. If it's a strong script, and you could go and make it for $2 million with, say, a name like John Cusack or Nicolas Cage or someone like that, or you could go and get Brad Pitt and make it for $20 million, and you're just really, most of that's going to, paying Brad Pitt and for, what comes along with that, as far as the perks and things. It can be as simple as that. It's not easy to get Brad Pitt, that's the difference. But not that it's easy to get the other guys either, but it's, that's sort of the budget level where they're working a lot of times in the $5 million and under. So, they're a little more accessible to producers.
And what are the different types of producers, and how are the tasks different?
There's a few different types of producers. A lot of it comes down to, just the title. A lot of them perform the same duties. The line producer, is sort of the person that is hired once the project has sort of gotten into pre-production and is starting to move forward. And they're really tracking the budget, cost reporting, making sure that you're staying on budget, the scheduling, working with the AD, all of that, sort of, nitty-gritty production elements. The producer, the lead producer, there's usually a few of them. Produced by is the credit sometimes that we give ourselves or that we're given. there are different elements that each person might bring in. So I may have a partner or two partners or three partners on a project, and each one of us sort of brings our own specific, elements to the table, so to speak. So, one producer may have some cast relationships, and they may be able to go to cast directly, and they're friends with so-and-so, and they can pass them the script without having to go to agents to kind of backdoor it that way, which is always nice to get try to get some cast attached earlier. They might have relationships with the director. All the producers typically have a say on the script. Everybody will sort of give notes and kind of chime in on if they think there's things that need to be changed or added, or characters removed, or combining characters or things like that.
Isn't that challenging when there are a lot of producers involved, and there often are, and everybody has creative freedom?
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. It can be challenging. Most of the people that I work with, I've worked with previously. I try to keep the same partners on a lot of projects. It can be challenging, if some people are super passionate about certain things. But we usually, it usually works itself out. Usually people can see, okay, we'll concede on this, but we have to do this that way, and that sort of thing. But I haven't really gotten into any issues where, we haven't been on the same page, so to speak. And that's obviously always a good thing. So, the executive producers can come in various forms. Typically the executive producer is the financier or one of the financiers. People that put the money up in, but again, if you're talking about getting money from a distributor or a sales agent, at first, it could be the sales agent that gets an executive producer credit. It could be, in independent films, as you mentioned, there's a lot of producers, a lot of times, because it's hard to get a movie made. So sometimes you need, we sort of trade credits in certain cases for different things. If someone makes an introduction to a distributor who ends up buying the movie, then, we'll give that person a credit for that because they've brought something to the table. But the producers are the ones that are usually on set, sort of seeing it through from beginning to end, finding the script, optioning it, handling the SAG paperwork, signing the director, the contracts, the cast, coming up with the casting strategy, overseeing the whole thing, getting it into post-production, seeing it through post-production. Associate producers are sort of, they might be a producer's assistant who has sort of, maybe been an assistant for a little while and kind of stepped up to the next level, and they're kind of given that credit. Or they could be, in a case where maybe we're not making the film we're making it as a non-union film, and we would give the second AD an associate producer credit if maybe he's a union worker and he can't take an AD credit. So that's sort of one that can be, it's a little arbitrary, can be kind of given out at your discretion. Yeah, and I think that pretty much covers it. I mean, there's co-executive producers, which is pretty much the same as the executive producer. Once there may be stipulation. I've done projects where there was one financier, and that person was the only person who was getting executive producer. He was the only one. So if we needed to give credits to other people later on, or the distributor or the sales agent, then they would get a co-executive producer credit.
In terms of independent films and big budget films and studio films, what is the difference in terms of financing a film? Because of course the risk is so high with indie productions, especially the ones that are unable to yet get name talent. So what are some ways for these aspiring producers who are still getting experience to finance their production?
Yeah, so there's a few ways to finance films. I mean, they're pretty much, there's only a few ways to do it, ultimately. So, the first and easiest and kind of the best way to do it is with equity. You find one financier who says, I love this project. How much do you need? Let me write the check, and that's it. And you kind of go off and do your thing. That, in my experience, is few and far between. So the way that I've structured and financed a lot of different projects is through pre-sales and minimum guarantees. I mentioned the minimum guarantees a little bit earlier. But that is, basically where you package up a project. You find a script you love. Maybe it's an action movie. Maybe it's a thriller, a drama, whatever it may be. You bring on a director, and then you start. Maybe that director has relationships with cast, or maybe you as a producer have relationships with bankable cast, or you bring on partners who do, or you have friends who are managers or agents who can help you kind of package it up, and you put together, what you think is going to be a bankable cast. So maybe, like I mentioned, like Nick Cage or John Cusack type of names in that under, $2.5 million budget. Then you go to sales agents, foreign sales agents. You go to domestic distributors and you show them the package and the script, and you say, here's what we need to make the movie. We need $2 million. We need $2.5 million. You put a budget together. You show them the budget. And then they'll, read the script, and then they'll say, okay, they'll come back, and maybe it's Lionsgate, and they'll come back and say, okay, we like this package. We can give you a minimum guarantee for $700,000 for just domestic in Canada. So, okay, so we're at $700,000. So that's pretty good. So you got a piece of it there. So now we say, how are we going to make up the last, say it's $2 million budget. How are we going to make up the last, 1.3? So we shoot in a state where there's a film a tax credit, an incentive, and that can cover up to 25 to 30% of the budget. So we do that, and we cover another maybe 400,000, 500,000 that way, and then so we're at 1.2, and then we go to a foreign sales agent. So there's so many different foreign sales agents, and they're the people. They acquire films, completed films, and they sell them to international territories. They also come in early, like at the packaging stage, like we're talking about, where they will acquire a project to then sell it once it's completed. So then they will give you a minimum guarantee for just the foreign territories. So they'll say, okay, we can sell the rest of the world outside of the US and Canada, since you already have Lionsgate, you've already sold that. We can sell the rest of the world for say 800,000. So now you're at 2.1, say 2.1 million, 2.2 million gross budget, and you need 2 million. So you take the paper. So you have the minimum guarantees you have the minimum guarantee for 800. You have the tax credit approval for 400, and you have the domestic MG from Lionsgate for 700. So you then have to take all of that to a bank, a private financier, any kind of film lender, and they'll evaluate the project, and then they will decide whether to lend the money to you against these contracts. So there's always fees involved. Normally they'll cash flow it maybe at 90 cents on the dollar, maybe 85 cents on the dollar. So you'll get 85%, say, of your 2.2, 2.3. They'll give you that in order to make the movie. And that's a good way to do it. You're not taking on equity because, as you mentioned, it's very risky. That when that you have these contracts, as long as you make the movie and deliver it, they're going to pay you what they promise, and they get their movie to sell, and you get to make the movie, and you're not, it's a much less risky endeavor at that point. So those are and then there's sort of combinations of both. You know what I mean? You could take, it doesn't have to be one or the other. You could take a tax credit and a domestic deal and a private investor. So you could take a domestic deal for 700,000, a tax credit for 400,000, and you're at 1.1. And then you have a private investor who comes in and says, I'll invest $1 million in this. I don't want to do the full 2, but I'll do $1 million. And then that goes against all the unsold foreign territories. So the investor then sits in first position against France and Germany, Italy, UK, Latin America, and all these other territories once the film gets made. So, but for the most part, it's MGs, pre-sales, and equity. And the pre-sale element is very similar to a foreign MG, but instead of them just giving you 1.1, or $1 million in a foreign MG, they'll take it to a market like American Film Market or Cannes or Toronto, and they'll sell territory by territory. They'll go to Germany and they'll say, can you give us 400,000 for Germany, and then France 200,000, and so on, and they'll piece it all together. So instead of having one MG from foreign, you may have 8 or 10. But if they're all, legitimate buyers and all of that, you can cash flow those the same way.
Mm-hmm. And what about product placement? Can it really bring money for the project, or just a little bit here and there, but it can't really finance it?
Product placement on the bigger scale, yes. In the studio world, you can get Coca-Cola, you can get Pepsi, you can get Apple, you can get bigger brands who will put money up. On the independent side, it's tough. It's not really going to, in my experience, make a dent in your budget. You might be able to raise 50,000 or something, which is something, but in the grand scheme of things of $2 million, it's not going to move the needle too much. But for studio projects, I know that some of the studios own brands and things, and they will utilize that. But in a lot of cases, yes, you'll only see Starbucks coffee in the movie, or you'll only see MacBooks in the movie. Apple,
Starbucks in Game of Thrones.
Well, that too. That's a mistake, but yes. Yep.
I thought it was a genius product placement.
Yeah, it went viral, so.
Right. Okay, and now again for the independent filmmakers, for the aspiring filmmakers, you mentioned getting name talent.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody has different tactics, but not everybody has a friend of a friend who is Brad Pitt's next door neighbor.
Right.
So what are some ways for aspiring producers to get name talent with lower level budgets? Are there any ways? Are there any secrets to it?
There are. I'll say this: you can really get to anyone if you have the money. That's what it comes down to in most cases. You can get to, if you go to Brad Pitt and you offer $8 million, he's going to listen. His agent's going to listen. But the risk there is if you don't have the money and you start making offers and things like that you can't back up, then you sort of lose your credibility. The most important thing is to have the money, because most actors want to work, especially now, with things having been shut down for so long, they want to work. The agents are, can be, they're meant to protect their clients, and the managers, they protect their clients. They don't want to waste their clients' time. So the worst thing that you can do is come in with an offer and not have the money to back it up, because then, okay, the agent maybe gets the script covered and it comes back, okay, this is a pretty good script. And you make the offer and it goes to Brad Pitt or whomever, and Brad reads it and says, oh, wow, I really like this project. And okay, well, the agent comes back and is ready to negotiate a deal, and you get down to close and you don't have the money, and they're gonna say, okay, well, we need you to put a deposit down. We need you to put 50% into escrow. We need you to put something to show that this is real. And when you don't have that, it all falls apart. So if you're trying to make a movie for the first time and you want to go big, it's tough. It's tough to just go big right away unless you have the money. If you have somebody who's backing you with $5 million or $1 million or $2 million, whatever it may be, you can come up with a casting strategy that makes sense for that budget level. And you can get some bigger names. You can get bigger talent for different projects. If you have the money, outside of that, it's really kind of relationship driven. It's finding a way to, because, a lot of times the agents will sort of block the project from getting to the actor, but if you can backdoor it and you can get it to the actor and the actor reads and says, hey, I want to do this. This is great. Then you've already got the in. It's a little bit easier. But like you said, not everybody has a friend of a friend or his next door neighbor too. So it's difficult. It's difficult to get in. My advice would be just to say, figure out, come up with your casting lists. Who do you want? Be realistic. If you're trying to make your first film, and you think you're going to get Brad Pitt, it's very unlikely that you're going to get Brad Pitt. But if you're trying to make your first film and you have a rich uncle, or you find somebody who wants to invest for some reason in your project, they love the script and they want to give you $1 million, find a producer who knows what they're doing and can maximize that $1 million by getting a tax credit, and try to build that budget up a little bit, and then utilize that money to go out and get the cast. And you'd be surprised who you can get. A lot of people will kind of take money that they have to make a movie and just go and make it with whomever they can get, local actors or whatever. And there's a lot of, don't get me wrong, hiring local actors is fantastic. But it's harder to sell the movie down the road because there's a lot of product out there. A lot of people are making movies. So to make them stand out, sometimes you need to have a recognizable name. It doesn't have to be Brad Pitt, but somebody who is, maybe on a TV show who's kind of famous. It can be as small as that. And if you're making a movie with, for $200,000, say, and you get an actor who is Emmy nominated from a major show, that can be enough to at least get you in the door for distribution, and you can build from there. It's not easy. It's not easy, but there are ways to do it.
Brad Pitt is getting a lot of shout outs of our but that was my next question. Actually, you just led to it for the distribution. What are some key factors to look into? And again, we try to concentrate on giving practical advice to those who are just starting out. Mm-hmm. So that was great advice about getting someone who might not be as expensive but is Emmy nominated. Mm-hmm. So what else would it be? What else should filmmakers look into to not guarantee but maybe open a few doors towards distribution?
Yeah. Well, so you'll like I said, you'll be really surprised at who you can get when you really start looking into it. When I was in film school, there were thesis films that we had to do for our master's degrees, and some of them had notable TV actors in them because people just want to work, and not everybody. There's a ton of actors out there, and there aren't always as many projects, or maybe there's an actor that people aren't thinking of. And you'd be surprised who you can get, especially if they like the project. So that's one thing I would always say: shoot high, for your cast. I think someone starting out, a good way to kind of figure out the ropes a little bit too is to look into your key crew. A DP who really knows what they're doing, an editor who really knows what they're doing. Who has maybe done some bigger projects, but also does some indies and is willing to work. They can be great assets and really helpful and provide advice as well. Find a producer who, not every producer needs to have a huge resume. There's a lot of producers out there that know what they're doing and know how to do it, but they just haven't come across maybe the right project, or they haven't found that investor with money who's willing to kind of open their checkbooks. So find someone like that who really knows what they're doing, can really help package a project, isn't afraid to get in the trenches, will go to agents and fight to get the actors that you want. And especially on the financing side, can go to the distributors and the sales agents and figure out the tax credits. These are all important pieces in putting the project together. And I think, you can make a low budget film. A lot of the major film festivals, if you make a low budget movie, maybe it doesn't have a huge name, but maybe, the DP you have is an award-winning DP and it looks amazing and it's edited really well, and you get into Sundance and now you just sort of elevated yourself without the names. Sundance is difficult. You know what I mean? Everybody's trying to get into Sundance and Tribeca and South by and Toronto, but there are, a lot you can do it. It happens. It happens to people all the time. So I would just say it's always great to be, to just keep trying to move forward in some way, one. And two, you know, I mentioned earlier that the market's saturated, which is, you know, a bad thing for a lot of producers when we're trying to go out and find money, or we're trying to get a distributor or sales agent to come in early on a project and give us an MG or make pre-sales. But it's the easiest time ever right now to make a movie. You know, we have our cell phones that shoot in 4K. If you want to shoot a movie, you can do it with your phone, you know, and you could make a movie for nothing. If you have software to edit your project on your computer, you know, go get Premiere or Avid or Final Cut, figure out how to get that, and get some lights, and, you know, get some local actors, and people are willing to work, you know, and make your movie, and maybe you'll get into Sundance. You don't know, or maybe it just turns out really great. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's not the greatest thing in the world, but maybe you learn from it, you know. Yeah. And that's I heard a thing, I think it was Mark Duplass, who basically said, like, this is how I started out. Like, him and his brother started out making no budget films, you know, and by the third or fourth one, they got into Sundance, and they just kept doing it, and now they're, you know, they're huge now, you know, in the indie world.
That's very inspiring. So, steps-wise, an aspiring filmmaker comes up with a great script and has a few letters of interest from a few established filmmakers, a director of photography, maybe an assistant director who already have some awards. Would something like that be enough to put together letters for financiers, or what else should go into those letters to make them open them?
You know, for most, it depends if they're sort of, you know, in your typical film investors, if they really know the game and they know actor values and things like that. The cast is going to be the cast and the director is going to be the biggest thing. And the genre, you know, a lot of, I don't want to say it's easiest to get a thriller, action, or horror film made, but it kind of is the easiest to get those made because they're a little more marketable. You know, people sit at home, they want to watch a horror movie, or they want to watch an action movie. They're also sellable overseas more so than your drama or comedy. It's really hard to translate a comedy into different, you know, in different cultures. It's not funny, and it's tough. So, you know, that's one thing that I would say. You know, the action thriller genre is really sort of the one that is probably the easiest to get something off the ground. So if you find a great action thriller script, and then you go out and you try to get an actor on board, that's the best way to go about it. You know, try to find a little bit of money maybe, and figure out a casting strategy. You can try to go to some agents. You could try to go to, a lot of actors have their own production companies. So sometimes you can, you know, if you go on IMDb Pro, great resource for everybody, IMDb Pro. Pay for it. If you don't, definitely. You can find contact information there, and, you know, and send a cold email. You know, hey, I'm a producer. I'm trying to, you know, I have this great script. Here's the log line. Here's the budget. You know, and you might get a response. You might not, but just keep going. You know, keep trying. If you don't get a response from this person, maybe somebody else. Maybe the log line sparks to somebody else.
Okay. It's actually funny how you've mentioned about comedy and translating, because I love Friends. It's one of my favorite shows of all times. But when I tried to watch it in Russian, just for the fun of it, it was the worst. It was like those jokes were awful. But it was just funny that you mentioned it. But going into comedy, do you think it's worth it, even though it's not relatable to different countries and languages? Is it still worth it to spend time on writing comedy? And also, what about the 30-minute comedies and sitcoms? Are those still relevant?
Well, so for features, you know, it's tough. So I just recently produced an independent comedy that we shot. It's set in Philadelphia. We shot it in New Jersey. And, you know, we were able to get a nice little cast for it. The market, you know, it's up and down, and with independent comedies, they're difficult. When you're talking about, a studio movie, American Pie franchise or something like that, the studio can make whatever they want. If the studio loves the project, they can make it, and they can put whomever they want in it. You don't need a huge name. If the studio decides they want to make it and put an up and comer in it, they can do that. With comedies, I would say if you're writing a comedy, I would advise to write something that you think you can sell as opposed to make it independently. Mm-hmm. So by that, I mean, write something with a huge hook that, you think that you could get a production company, a studio, an agent, a manager interested in either buying or shopping it to sell it. But making it independently can be really tough because, again, like action's action. It translates, it's car chases, it's gunfights, it's whatever. It doesn't really matter the setting. It doesn't matter who it is. It's you like it or you don't, Yeah. Comedy, like there's so many different genres and subgenres. There's horror comedy, there's the frat comedy, there's dry humor, and everybody's tastes are different. So you could write an independent script and you may never find the producer or the financier who reads it and says, I find this funny, that's the difficulty of it. Write The Hangover, write that, write something that with a huge hook that you could see Universal putting out and try to sell it if you want to go the comedy route. That's my suggestion. If your goal is to get something made quickly, write an action thriller or just a straight action movie. 85, 90 pages of just action from, write Taken, from beginning to end, nothing but action. And you'll get interest from somebody. You send out cold emails, I'm telling you, everybody is looking for the next Taken or the next, John Wick. That's what they want, that's what they can sell. John Wick is now they've greenlit 5, I believe. They just greenlit 2 more films in the John Wick franchise, 5. And there's a series in development at Stars. So, I mean, it's just these things, they'll keep going. If they're good, the movie's good. Like it'll just keep going.
And what's the way for aspiring screenwriters to, and again, you said aim high, so that's kind of an aim high thing, but what's the way to write a Netflix original if they're just starting out? And I understand when they have an established CAA agent, that's an easy way. But what if they're just starting out? Is there any way or no? Just keep on trying, building up a resume and get an agent? Or is there kind of like a little shortcut?
I mean, I wouldn't say there's a shortcut. I would say, consume. That's one thing that I was taught early on. Like, look, if you want to be a producer, you got to go to the movies. You got to watch what's being made. You got to watch everything. I mean, I watch several movies a week. I have 3 or 4 TV shows that I'm watching at any given time when I can, just to try to stay current. The most important thing when, if you're trying to sell to Netflix, you have to know what Netflix is buying. What movies are they making? What's working? What's the top 10 trending? What are the movies that are working for them? Because that's what they're gonna want more of. So, Extraction with Chris Hemsworth, it's an action movie, did really well. The one with Charlize Theron did really well. There was a Jamie Foxx action movie that came out last week, or a couple weeks ago. These high concept, action films, something like Looper, come up with a great idea that's this high concept action project that can be made for, 10 to 15 million. And I think I can't say that Netflix is going to buy it, but that's the way that I see, you can get in, you find a producer who has a good relationship with Netflix, and if they read it and like it, then you can get into Netflix, or you find a manager who can set up a meeting at Netflix for you to pitch, or, a director who has directed something with Netflix for Netflix, or an agent, you know what I mean? So it's really just coming up with for screenwriters, the marketable concept that is a high marketable concept, and whether it's horror or action or thriller, you know, has it been done before? You know, is it derivative of something else? What makes it different? What's the hook? You know, these are all things that are important. You know, they're not going to buy a derivative. You know, they have John Wick now, so they don't need a derivative. What's the next, you know, John Wick? What's, you know, and sometimes, you know, and that's difficult because a lot's been done, but you know, figure out a way to do it new, or, you know, take something and turn it on its head and make it just a little different. What's something that worked, and how can we take that and make a change to it to make it new, you know, and thinking about it that way. Yeah, I mean, there's no easy way. Everybody's pitching Netflix. Everybody wants Netflix. You know, it's really tough, and we're all competing against, you know, all the stars now have their own production companies, and all the directors who are, you know, huge names are launching their own production companies, and they're the ones that are, you know, I'm competing against them, and, you know, everybody is. So it's tough all the way around, but eventually, if you keep working at it, you'll make it through. You know, it's really just about persistence, in my experience. You just keep going, and you'll catch a break. You will.
Mm-hmm. Now, you've been mentioning international distribution. With the international distribution, how safe is it to write about some controversial topics, or to make one country a villain, and then, you know, that's where the spies are coming from, things like that? Because we see it often in films, but then we're expecting to sell to that country. You know, we'll how does that work? Like, where is that fine line?
That's a good point. You know, it's you know, most important is the U.S., you know, distribution. That's where most of the money is going to come from. But yeah, if you make you know, if you make the villain French or German or Russian or whatever, it's, you know, they get a lot of projects like that. So I mean, it's not something that they haven't seen before, but they're going to be less inclined to buy it when they're competing against, you know, if there's 3 other projects, probably not going to buy that. Somebody might, but that's, you know, it's a smaller, you know, one country not buying it isn't necessarily going to impact the finance as much, you know, unless it's a big country. You know, if it's Germany or whatever, that a lot of money comes from them, then that can be an issue. So I would watch that, you know, when writing, you know, think about not, you know, making exactly, not vilifying a certain country in your project.
You just see it done so often, and I always wonder, you know, like, is that okay? Does that not make them fear that it's not going to sell?
Yeah. I mean, it's in some cases, yeah, I think it does. In other cases, you know, maybe they don't care as much if it's a wide release. You know, they're not worried about the money that they're going to make in the one territory. On independent films, you do kind of have to think about that a little bit, because if you do alienate Latin America, which is, you know, can be a huge territory, you know, you might not be able to finance your project. So
makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, what are 3 pieces of advice that you would like to share? Something that you have learned along the way, some mistakes maybe that you've made and now you know not to make them. What would you like to share with our viewers?
I think when I was in film school, my first year, I was in a class, and an agent from Paradigm came in to talk to us, and he said, you know, he was like, I went to Pepperdine, and I went through 4 years. I had no idea what I was going to do. And when I graduated, I had to try to figure out, you know, what the heck I'm doing, and I have no idea. And eventually, I became an agent and all that, and that's great. But like, I spent a lot of time early on, like, I didn't have projects when I came out of school. I didn't have, you know, anything that made me stand out. So he was like, to us as producers, there were 12 of us in the producing program. He said, you know, you guys are producers right now, so use this time that you're in grad school for 2 years to develop projects and make relationships. And that probably was the biggest piece of advice that hit me, because from there I started networking more. You know, I met a lot of writers in working with, when I mentioned I worked with David Foster, I met a lot of writers because a lot of writers were pitching us stuff. So I made relationships with writers, and maybe David would pass on a project, but then I would talk to the writer on the side and say, hey, I like this, or hey, could you write this, or could you write that, or maybe we could develop this together. And I built a lot of relationships that way, and I developed a lot of projects. And after maybe 6 months or a year of that, I started, going out and pitching my projects like I was a producer. Hey, I optioned the script, I developed it, let's work together on it, or coming up with a TV concept and pitching it. And when you start looking at yourself like you're a producer or you're a writer, and you believe in yourself that way, you can almost, not to sound cheesy, but like you can, will things to happen in a certain sense, and I just think that if you have time, especially right now during COVID, if you're working from home, if, you're on unemployment right now, if you're not working your full-time job and you want to become a screenwriter, then you just write all day. Write and research. You look into, again, like, don't just come up with an idea and run with it. Do your research on it. If you come up with a drama, okay, well, how many dramas have been made this year? It's not as marketable. So go and look at what Netflix is doing. Look at what Amazon is doing. Look at what the studios are releasing. Look at what movies are coming out on VOD. Look at the biggest selling films of the year out of Sundance in Toronto. What are the big movies that are selling? Are they the horror films out of the festival, or what? So, and then figure out what to write, because then that's already going to sort of narrow you down into a more, level playing field, so to speak, because you're writing projects that the buyers want. So you're not, when you spend 3 months writing a script and you think it's the greatest script in the world and it's an indie comedy, there isn't a huge market for indie comedy. It's really tough to get it off the ground. But if you write a $5 million action movie with a unique hook and a clever twist, now you may be onto something, and then just go and push it. Go on IMDb Pro, find the companies that look and see who produced John Wick. Look and see who produced your favorite movie that was just released on VOD, your favorite action movie that just came out with Nicolas Cage or whatever, and go to them. And email them and say, hey, I have this project. I'm a writer. Let's work together. And that's what I did. I mean, in all honesty, that's what I did.
Yeah.
And,
that's fantastic. You just made it sound so real. I love it. No, that's great. That's what we want to hear. We want to show to those who are just starting out that it's hard. It's definitely hard. There's a lot of rejection on the way, but it happens. You work, you push on every door, and then somebody opens.
Somebody opens. It's going to happen. Somebody is going to, I get emails a lot of people sort of emailing me where I was, 8-10 years ago, and I'll help that person because I was that person at one point. And eventually you will get you'll email somebody who says, oh, wow, like I remember when I wrote my first script or my second script or whatever, and I needed help, and so helped me. And so I'm going to talk to this person, give them some advice. I mean, they may not be willing to buy your script, but they may tell you how to make it a little bit better. Or they may say, look, I don't think you can sell this right now. Put it on the shelf and write something else. Write an action movie. Or here's a contact. Here's my old manager. I'm going to introduce you to him and maybe he can help you. You just never know what doors, will open. But you have to knock. That's the key. You have to knock and keep knocking because, yes, there's rejection. I got rejected 1,000 times at least. I mean, I stopped counting eventually, but at least, early on when I was emailing, people just either don't respond or, they kind of blow you off or whatever. But there were those people that got on the phone, that talked, that took a meeting, when I was 22, 23, 24 years old. And, there are people that will help. You just, like I said, you just got to knock and keep going.
And you made them proud.
Yeah.
I'm happy that you did that.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So who would you like to nominate to be the next speaker to send the elevator down and help our aspiring actors and filmmakers make it in the industry?
Yeah. A friend of mine from Philadelphia, the movie that we just made, he's a director. He's a writer, producer on it. I will. I'll nominate him. His name's Paolo Pilati. And yeah,
awesome.
I think he's more of a writer director than anything. So he'll hopefully be able to give some insight on that side of things. But yeah.
Super. Thank you for the nomination. We'll look forward to speaking with him. And thank you very much for sending the elevator back down and for sharing so much insightful advice and so many tools that our viewers can now use and hopefully move up the ladder. So we wish you all the best of luck.
Thank you so much.
We're very grateful to DJ for the time, and
my pleasure
to see your films on the big screen one day. So
yeah, hopefully soon.